You know those moments when a player says, "Can I jump off the balcony?" or "Can I swing from the chandelier?" That only happens if they know that the balcony or the chandelier are actually there. Terrain isn't just there to look pretty, it's a set of prompts that tells your players what they're allowed to grab, climb, flip, shove, or set on fire. Whether that's a full set of dungeon tiles, a simple battle mat, or pure theatre of the mind. I'm Simon, and I run everything from Warhammer Quest with a full set of dungeon tiles, to D&D games on battle mats, to Theatre of the Mind OSR games over Discord. In this video I'm going to give you tips to use the terrain and maps to actually make your encounters better, whatever style you play in. Tip 1 is to match the terrain to the style of game that you're running instead of forcing one setup to do everything. For example, if I'm playing Warhammer Quest, it absolutely requires dungeon tiles. That game is effectively a board game built around slotting corridors and rooms together, so it makes sense to commit to full tiles on the table. When I run my D&D games, though, I don't find it works as well with a big precise dungeon layout. For that, I use either the Big Book of Battle Mats or Professor Dungeon Master's Ultimate Dungeon Terrain. I'll put a link to both in the description. This isn't sponsored, I'm just going to show you what I actually use. So it depends on how much I feel like carrying as well if I'm not playing at home. Some people still enjoy playing with a full set of dungeon tiles, and that's cool. But I prefer to only use this stuff when there's an encounter that requires it, rather than every corridor being physically represented on the table. The Big Book of Battle Mats has already got some terrain drawn on the pages, so I can just open to a suitable map and we're good to go. Ultimate Dungeon Terrain is a flexible base too, it doesn't need anything on top of it, but it definitely benefits from a couple of bits of terrain in certain situations, just to make it more visually interesting, and to remind players that there are things they can interact with. If I'm running a game over Discord, most of the time it is just pure theatre of the mind. In that case, the terrain is basically just what I describe. The point is that I'm not dragging out a full dungeon setup for a light, fast game, and I'm not trying to run Warhammer Quest with no map. Pick the level of physical terrain that fits the system and the practicalities of your table. Tip 2 is to make sure that every encounter has at least one interesting feature the characters can actually use. It doesn't matter whether you're on a full set of tiles or a battle mat or ultimate dungeon terrain, or even just pure description. There should be something in the space that invites interaction beyond "I move up and I hit it." On the table, that might be a raised platform, a pit, a cage, a brazier on fire. It could be a rickety balcony, a summoning circle, whatever fits the scene. On Ultimate Dungeon Terrain, that could be as simple as dropping one or two bits of terrain on the top so everyone can see there's a statue to push over or a column to hide behind. You could even just use a d6 dice for that. It just needs to have something and you go, that's a statue. And the players will interact with it because it's there. In Theatre of the Mind, it's exactly the same principle, you just say it out loud. This room has a chandelier overhead and a long table in the middle of the room, and there's a big stained glass window behind the cult leader. Your players can't say they swing from the chandelier if you never told them there is one. One or two good features per scene are enough to make the fight or the negotiation feel grounded in a place instead of taking place in a white void. Tip 3 is to make sure the terrain ties into what the encounter is actually about. If the goal is just to reduce all the enemies to 0 hit points, Most people will just stand roughly where they started and trade blows. As soon as you tie the objective to the space, the terrain starts doing work for you. Maybe they need to reach a lever on the far side of a room while the enemies try to hold them back. Maybe they're defending a narrow bridge or a doorway. Maybe they have to throw cultists off a platform before the ritual completes. On a battle mat or dungeon tiles, that means placing things so that the players have to move, not just to fight in a clump. On Ultimate Dungeon terrain, it can be as simple as putting the objective marker, the altar or the hostage in a specific place on the circle and saying, they are over there and it matters. In Theatre of the Mind, you do the same thing with words. The hostage is bound to the pillar in the centre, the archers are up on the balcony, the only way up is the staircase on your left. Once they know where things are in relation to each other, they start making tactical choices, not just attack rolls. Tip 4 is to reuse and reskin your layouts instead of feeling like you need a brand new map every single encounter. The same dungeon tile, the same page from the Book of Battle Mats, or the same Ultimate Dungeon terrain with a statue on it could serve a lot of different scenes if you're willing to change the dressing. So the cave could be a bandit hideout one week or a monster lair the next. The ruined hall could be a haunted ballroom if you describe broken chandeliers and ghostly footprints instead of goblin graffiti. Even online, you can reuse the same simple sketch on a whiteboard style map and just tell them what's different this time. Your players will remember the situation and the choices they made more than the exact floor plan. Reusing and reskinning saves you some prep and storage, and it makes the world feel consistent when locations show up again in a different state. Tip 5 is to use terrain or your descriptions of terrain to remind players that the world is interactive. A lot of the players have been trained by computer games to just think in terms of attack, spell, item, end turn. If the battlefield is just a flat grid with enemies on it, that's often how they're going to play. Dropping a couple of bits of terrain onto Ultimate Dungeon terrain or putting a few extra crates or pillars on a battle mat is not just about making it look prettier, although it does do that. It's a physical reminder that their characters can jump on things and flip tables and kick over braziers, slam doors and so on. In Theatre of the Mind, your description does the same job. If you mention the chandelier, the long table, the bookcase, the balcony, you're giving them permission to get creative. They start asking, can I swing on that, or can I shove them off this? Instead of just, I attack again. Terrain, whether physical or verbal, is how you show that environment is part of the game. Once your table gets used to that idea, you'll find that even very simple setups lead to much more interesting scenes. So those are my 5 tips for using terrain and battle maps to make your encounters better. Match the terrain to the game you're actually running. Put at least one interesting feature in every scene. Tie the terrain into the goal so that people have a reason to move. Reuse and reskin your layouts instead of reinventing the wheel, and use terrain or description of terrain as a reminder that the world is something that the players can push, pull, climb and swing on. You don't need a wall of resin scenery for every game, but a little bit of thought about the space, even in Theatre of the Mind, can make a huge difference to how your encounters feel. If you have a favourite bit of terrain or a trick you use at your table, drop it in the comments because I'm always looking for new ideas. And if you want more GM and tabletop videos like this, hit subscribe so that you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching and have fun setting up your next game.